Hello, and welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is the podcast of free minds, free markets, and free takes. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my illustrious colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Nick Gillespie, and Matt Welch. Everyone say hello.
Howdy.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello, and happy Monday. We bombed Iran. On Saturday, America joined Israel's attacks against Iran's nuclear facilities after President Donald Trump ordered American bombers and submarines to strike 3 heavily fortified sites. In a brief late-night speech on Saturday, Trump said the strikes were successful, and he warned Iranian leadership that America would respond forcefully if Iran attacked Americans in return. Some reports say that Trump wants this to be a one-and-done, a single successful attack, not a prolonged war. But Trump and top administration officials are clearly leaving the door open for more strikes and maybe even regime change. So here is my opening question. How are Americans supposed to vote against war? Yeah, I know it's true. Trump has long said he doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but he also ridiculed Barack Obama for being a bad negotiator whose weaknesses would get America into a war with Iran. That was supposed to be a bad thing. Trump campaigned against American interventionism and forever wars. His breakout moment in the 2015 GOP primary was when he criticized George W. Bush and the war in Iraq. Trump is supposedly an America First populist. But with war in Iran, that's incredibly unpopular with Americans. And yet here we are. And this has happened over and over again. It happened with George W. Bush, who promised humble foreign policy, then took us to war in Iraq. It happened with Obama. Obama won the 2008 Democratic primary partly because of his opposition to the war in Iraq, and he won the 2008 presidential election partly because his Republican opponent was superhawk John McCain. And then look what happened with our kinetic military action in Libya. Even sleepy Joe Biden supported Ukraine as a sort of American proxy war against Russia. This happens again and again and again. The American people vote against war, and then the nation gets dragged into another overseas conflict, and those conflicts never go as smoothly as planned. So, Matt, I want to start with you. Does democracy die in the Situation Room?
Well, I think one of the answers is that in order to dissuade presidents from using this marvelous, superb military you've assembled here, in the words of Madeleine Albright in 1993, vote on the congressional level. Vote for more Thomas Masseys or Ro Khannas, if that's how you roll. People who have an articulated theory of power and its corruptions that involve understanding that the U.S., with the most powerful military in the history of the world, is just this huge do-something button, and that every president is tempted to mash that button for whatever his or her idea of the thing that they need to fix is. So yes, it's a damn shame that we have a series of presidents who go in promising a humble foreign policy and then not doing it. But you need a broad-based idea, a critique of power. So vote on several levels, preferably not your local city council, but rather the House of Representatives and Senate for people who actually have a principled idea about this stuff.
Nick, what are voters who don't want America to get involved in another war supposed to do?
Move to Canada. Pretty much.
It is cooler there, I hear.
At least for the time being, right? Matt's general advice is correct, I think, but the fact of the matter is that Congress has not been doing its job, since World War II, certainly since Korea. So there's not a lot that you can vote for on, in terms of this. And it's really, when you look at presidents who were less bellicose, one thing that you can do is vote for politicians who don't just say, I'm for war, I'm against it, but actually have a coherent foreign policy that they've explained. You brought up, the idea of America First. Trump has said 2 things since the Iran bombing or coincidental with it. One is that America First is whatever he says it is. And so right now, America First involves bombing a bunch of sites in Iran. And the other thing is that he said he was, he didn't want regime change, but now he's kind of considering it, if you follow Truth Social and whatnot. So the important thing, I think, for people who are not interested in war all the time, this is a time to step up and be counted and be heard as registering a negative opinion to the extent that that matters. But, if Congress isn't voting on it and Trump isn't listening, all you can do is raise a racket and try and minimize things like this.
Katherine, there was a vocal contingent of libertarians and libertarian-adjacent people who voted for Trump because they said he wasn't going to start any new wars, and who said other libertarians should vote for Trump for the same reason. What do you have to say to them now?
All politicians are garbage, and they will disappoint you in the end, is a thing that I've said before and will say again. I mean, I think in some ways the J.D. Vance take on this is the one that gets at the heart of a lot of people's thinking, which is, yeah. All these other presidents screwed this up. But the difference was they were dumb and my guy is good. And like, yes, it's weird that Vance is just saying that out loud with like American flags behind him as if that's an official statement. But that is what everyone thinks. And I think it's important. Yes, obviously, I would like this all to be done with congressional authorization. But I also think it's important to keep in mind Americans actually don't mind one cool, really badass bomb strike. What they don't like is forever wars. And so I think making that connection in people's minds. You can't just do the one cool badass bomb strike and not have a forever war sometimes. Or making sure that people do enforce those preferences at the electoral level is probably the place where there's more leverage.
Vance has clarified, though, that we're not at war with Iran. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program. So he's being very helpful here. And one of the things that will come out of this, and who knows, whether or not the strikes were as effective as initially claimed, but we're going to see on the MAGA right a very bizarre kind of series of splits and schisms among people who were more anti-war and more people who are more pro-war, and how they start to come to terms with this. And you see that already in Vance sucking up, trying to explain this to himself first and foremost, but then, and also the American people. Whereas somebody like Tulsi Gabbard seems to be, who is missing, from the announcement of the successful bombing strikes, and who Trump has put down at least twice in the past couple of weeks as not mattering, even though she's the DNI. So much stuff is going to be happening in American politics as much as in Middle Eastern politics.
And much stuff is going to be happening on this podcast in just a moment. We have a big show, much more on Iran. What's up with J.D. Vance? We're going to talk about him. Where's Congress? How should libertarians think about nuclear proliferation in a dangerous world? Listener question on selling federal land and the New York mayoral race. Is it really Andrew Death to Granny Cuomo versus a social media socialist? Kind of seems like it is. We all deserve better choices in politics, and we're going to help you understand just what those choices should and could be. Before we continue, Reason is debating the Manhattan Institute City Journal on drug legalization tomorrow, Tuesday, June 24th, right here in sweltering hot Washington, D.C. Still have some tickets left. I'm going to be moderating. Get yours at reason.com/events. We'll be right back after this advertisement. If you're tired of cable news debates and Twitter shouting matches, and you're looking for serious, good faith conversations between people who actually care about liberty, then it is time to check out the Future of Freedom podcast. Each episode dives deep into a single topic, tariffs, campus speech, Doge, and brings together two guests who disagree about the best path forward. But here's the twist. This isn't a debate show. No interrupting, no dunking. Each guest, whether libertarian or conservative, has to make their own case, not just tear down the other side. It's compelling, it's civil, it's genuinely challenging. You will hear familiar Reason voices like Nick Gillespie, Stephanie Slade, and Joe Lancaster alongside other principled thinkers on the right and center-right. Each brings sharp ideas to the table. So if you believe the future of freedom depends on more than just winning arguments, and you are ready for something deeper than the usual echo chambers, please check out the Future of Freedom podcast. Real disagreement, real ideas, real conversations. Subscribe to The Future of Freedom wherever you get your podcasts. That's Future of Freedom. All right. The American attack struck 3 nuclear sites inside Iran, including Fordo, which is buried deep inside a mountain. So far, we've heard that these sites were severely damaged, but it's not at all clear, as Nick said earlier, how far Iran's nuclear program has been set back. Not doing segment titles this week, but if we were, we'd call this one Fordo Win, with a whole lot of question marks. Because I have.
Is this the O.J. Simpson version of If I Did It?
Yeah.
That's
Continue.
right.
And a Ford, too.
That book never came out, so we're not going to acknowledge it. The question I want to start with is what is up with Vice President J.D. Vance? We've already talked about this a little bit. But like Trump, you can kind of understand what's going on in some ways. Just he's not an ideological person. Vance, however, has always seemed like a true skeptic of foreign intervention. He actually doesn't like this stuff. I mean, you see that even in the leaked signal chats that came out, right? So But Vance has been defending these strikes, saying things like, I can certainly empathize with Americans who are exhausted after 25 years of foreign entanglements in the Middle East. Yeah, you can empathize with them, but now you're going to go ahead and defend those new foreign entanglements, right? Because the difference, he says, I think this is what Katherine said earlier. The difference is that back then we had dumb presidents, and now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's national security objective. Not at war with Iran, we're at war with Iran's nuclear program. Matt Welch, is that a distinction worth caring about? What's going on with J.D. Vance?
Well, he's vice president and he would like to be president. So he is going to contort, and he's been doing this on all manner of policies now for several years running, coming out with positions that were contra to the way he was looking at the world within recent memory, within certainly Trump's ascension to the top of the Republican Party. So he's going to do what it takes to stay in office and stay in Trump's good graces. That means kissing Trump's ring and finding ways to marry his public statements to whatever the president is doing. I kind of disagree with the formulation that you started this with, that Trump has no ideology. I think it's a kind of an easy way to look at things. I think Trump is a Jacksonian. A lot of people, meaning Andrew Jackson, which is like irritable. I will bite your head off if you get close. I will act erratically. I have an American first attitude. I am contemptuous of anything that restrains me from acting in my executive branch way. I think there's a lot of people who grafted some more kind of Ron Paulish aspirations onto that, but he was never going to be that guy. He was always going to be more Jacksonian. J.D. Vance, that whole statement about how we, before we had dumb presidents, is wonderfully resonant of what Barack Obama said. I think the historical comp that we should look at the strongest with this one is not necessarily Iraq previously. Another one is Libya in 2011. Barack Obama was utterly contemptuous of Congress before that. In a very similar way, he didn't even really bothered to justify it legally. He wouldn't even, in 60 or 90 days afterwards, report to Congress like, hey, what's up? Which is they are supposed to do under the War Powers Resolution. He pressed the do something button to try to stop a genocide, in his words, in Benghazi of all places. But what Barack Obama said in 2008 is, I'm not opposed to all wars. I'm opposed to dumb wars. This is where we are with American politics and American executive power. So it was interesting to watch J.D. Vance when Trump was giving his very Jacksonian, minute and a half speech, because he was behind Trump, as was Marco Rubio, who was vigorously nodding in many places, and Pete Hegseth, who was trying to figure out where the camera was. J.D. Vance looked more perplexed. It's more of a challenge for him. He was playing the role that Marco Rubio played during the Zelensky White House blow-up of being a little bit awkward and uncomfortable. But ultimately, he's going to go wherever Donald Trump goes. If Donald Trump decides, and he might, because he already teased it out, that he wants to do regime change, J.D. Vance will be the public face explaining that to the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing of the GOP. We don't expect anything more or less from J.D. Vance.
Katherine, there's a lot of arguments for this war, and I just kind of want to get your sense of if there are any good ones, right? We hear that this war will be easy. Like I said, it's one and done. It's a quick strike, that this is vital to American security to prevent Iran from getting nukes. And in Trump's Saturday night speech, we also heard that Iran has killed many Americans going back decades, which is true. So steelman the justifications for this attack. Is there any good argument for bombing Iran?
I feel like you're trying to trick me into making the exact same mistake that I made with the Iraq War when I was working at the Weekly Standard back in those days.
You worked at the Weekly Standard during the Iraq War,
I feel like I should confess that. Yeah. So Bill Kristol is out here on Twitter. He's tweeting, bring back the Project for the New American Century, which was housed right next door to the Weekly Standard's offices and was just a couple of guys in an office doing white papers, to be clear. But the case, the steelman case for doing this now is very, very similar. Matt is right. Libya is a reasonable parallel, but it is also the steelman case for doing this now is very similar to the case for why we went into Iraq in the early aughts. And that is because all the smart pants people who know about this are saying, no, this is the moment because Iran is uniquely weakened. Unlike the conditions of all the predecessors, their relationships with their proxies are bad. Everyone's distracted. Everybody's kind of burned out from the other conflicts in the region. We know what is up. This is the moment. And thank God we had Donald Trump to be the man to meet the moment. And I think that is a case that, and by the way, we can do it quick and get out. And by the way, if we don't do it, we face a kind of global, either nuclear or chemical or some combination, terror threat that will continue to emanate from this enemy country. It's the same story. It's always the same story. That did not, none of that is how it played out last time around. I don't think it's how it's going to play out this time around if we do kind of continue to engage there. This is the temptation always is we will march on Baghdad. We will take Baghdad. We will get out. We will blow up the nukes. We will be sure we did it successfully. We will get out. We're pretty bad at getting out. Like, real bad.
Just to kind of continue with the Steelman stuff, there are significant differences between this and Iraq. And part of it is that we don't have a president who committed to region building. You'll recall after all the success in Afghanistan, George W. Bush, when we pivoted to Iraq, for absolutely no reason, it was kind of done as, well, this is where the global war on terror's next front is opening up. And it was plainly because the hunt for bin Laden in Afghanistan or in Central Asia had just kind of had dried up. But at that point, Bush was talking about not just nation building, but region building. And it was all about regime change. So I think
but Bush was against it before he was for it.
Yeah.
So Trump is maybe against it until he's for it.
All I'm saying is after 9/11, Bush did not hold back at all. And, this was of a piece of a new vision of a foreign policy that he, Rumsfeld, Cheney were talking about extensively and everybody in the press. I'm not justifying, it was a total mistake in 2003 to go into Iraq and irrelevant. I remember calling it just a bait and switch from the war on terror, meaning, Al-Qaeda and bin Laden. Here we are not, we had not been occupying Iran. We had not been doing no-fly zones and things like that. And Israel is busy reshaping the geopolitics of the Middle East. And we are helping out an ally who we actually have, defense treaties and contracts with and things like that. So I think in that sense, you can say this is different, and it might be a meaningful difference, especially if this is the extent of American action. What happens all the time, and this, I'm not going to add much to what Matt and Katherine have already said, but if Iran, attacks an American ship in the area, if a bunch of people, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, were starting to say, now we've got all these sleeper cells, Iranian sleeper cells in America that were let in because Joe Biden was too busy eating ice cream and not patrolling the southern border. So anything that happens now, good or, anything negative that happens to an American anywhere is going to be seen as a pretext for more involvement in Iran, which I think is going to be really terrible. The other questions, the questions for me right now are, one, were the strikes actually effective in the ways that they're talking about? Because the stuff I've read said, there was a lot of activity at these sites where trucks were moving stuff out. So maybe, it did not
at
actually
Fordo in
destroy.
particular. And there's a number of reports that basically say that the nuclear material, not the centrifuges themselves, but the nuclear material that is key to making a nuclear bomb and breaking out may have been evacuated from the site a day or two before the attacks. And so Iran may still have all of the relevant material, which would mean they're probably only months, maybe a year or two away from making a nuclear bomb if we don't go on.
Matters though, like if you push it back a year or a couple of years, I assume that matters geopolitically. The other big question, which I have only read totally conflicting reports on, were countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE in on this, or are they okay with it because Iran is one of their biggest enemies and it is a weakened regional power that they want to see gone? Saudi Arabia has been moving towards something like recognition of Israel. Will this make that impossible, or will that make it more probable? And those are the things that I'm most concerned about. And we have no way of knowing that, at least, right now and probably for the foreseeable future.
Matt, I want to ask you about the nuclear program, the state of Iran's nuclear program. I know that you're an expert and you've been doing on-the-ground reports. No, I mean, there's this argument that that's going around right now that says that basically once Israel started bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, you had to finish the job. Because as soon as the first bomb fell, then that means Iran, right, or someone had to finish the job, I should say. Not Matt Welch personally, not even necessarily America, but maybe America. Because once the attacks started, then that would mean that Iran had a huge incentive to break out for a bomb at the next possible moment. And so you got to go in, after you start bombing, you got to go in and finish it all and take out the entire nuclear program. And that only America could really reliably do that because only America has these 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs that were maybe capable of taking out Fordo and some of the other sites. Do you think that is a plausible argument? Sort of, what do you say to that? Because it does seem to me like once the bombs start falling, Iran does in fact have a pretty strong incentive to become a nuclear power at the next chance that they get.
Here's my cheeky a-hole response, is that only America has the United States Constitution, which has Congress declaring war, plus a war powers resolution that says you either need a declaration of war, a authorization of the use of military force. They don't mention this, but they could have mentioned preferably one that doesn't have Iraq in the title. And also, the president has the ability to defend America if America is under attack or under imminent threat of attack, which it was not in this case at all. There was no imminent threat of attack against the United States in this case. It's not just a pedantic point to point out that the Constitution and the existing laws are against what Trump did. And he's acting, in my view, in violation of both the letter and the spirit of that law. Those are there for a reason. They've been serially disregarded for a long time, but that doesn't mean we should just say, oh, well, that's just the way it is now. That's one thing. Two is that the argument of once you start, you should finish. Well, Israel started this part of this war. Iran started many parts of many wars too, including things that are directed at the United States and their Ring of Fire proxies and their raining of missiles into Israel last year, which is not an incidental thing. That is an act of war that they engaged in last year. Israel started the let's destroy their nukes and their missile abilities. I don't think that it is right and proper for the United States to be the one who says, well, only we have this bunker busting technology. And so therefore, what Israel started, we have a unique responsibility to finish. I don't think that's how it works. This is Israel's war. I understand Israel's point of view in this war and have a lot of sympathy for Israel's point of view in this war. Being surrounded for a long time by proxies who are trying to murder you sucks. And it makes you a little bit tetchy about people who have been very actively engaged in harassment of your regime for a long time and have sent missiles into your territory. But that's not the U.S.'s role or responsibility. Israel did this knowing that they would then say, well, look, U.S. has to finish this, but that doesn't mean the U.S. actually has to do what Israel wants them to do in this case.
Since you mentioned Tulsi Gabbard and the assessment about whether or not Iran is breaking for a nuclear weapon, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. So this is the top person, right, advising Trump on security threats, right, is the IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003. Now, Trump says he doesn't care. Trump says Tulsi is wrong, but that is, as of late March, the official assessment. Katherine, he's just ignoring this? He doesn't care?
I just feel like there's no particular reason to think that we should be relying on the consensus of the intelligence community. I mean, that's sort of like a grumpy, semi-radical libertarian take, I guess. But it is the position of the intelligence community that there's yellow cake uranium and we sent freaking Hans Blix in there to find it or whatever. We're always having this conversation. That was the version of it in 2002, 2003, whenever it was. And I think it is fair to be skeptical of the consensus of the intelligence community, which has many, many, many other specific interests at stake. There are lots of libertarian types who would point to big questions about this. And it's weird that Tulsi Gabbard is the voice of this, right? Like, we are in a deeply, deeply weird timeline where it's like, okay, well, maybe like Tulsi Gabbard, her advice being ignored by Donald Trump, plus the Ayatollah and Netanyahu, like, yeah, that's a reasonable group of people to make sure we don't end the world. Like, oh my God, this is not a good situation. But I think, I think that a lot of people would like to cast this as like there's the intelligence community and reckless Trump. And I don't see it that way at all.
I agree with that. I mean, that you can't see it as one or the other, but there is something so profoundly screwed up if you cannot trust the intelligence committee, the head of U.S. intelligence testifying before Congress, and they are either wrong or lying or winking at things like that. And this gets to the large nonstop scandal and downward just decline in trust and confidence in the government. And obviously we don't trust other governments' information because who the hell knows? But like the fact that we don't know, whether or not the intelligence community in the U.S. is even doing good faith reporting on things like that. I mean, it's weird that it becomes more comforting to think, oh, well, they're just incompetent, like the way they were right before the Soviet Union collapse. But I mean, this is like, a kind of an epistemological nightmare that we're in. And it is very, very disturbing. And I don't know what you do with that other than, again, moves to Canada.
Yeah, this is not a situation where you can do your own research, right? You take someone's word or you don't, and that's kind of all there is to it. Matt, I want to go back to Congress here since you brought that up in your opening response. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Important document. Congress shall have the power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, make rules concerning captures on land and water. Now, we know that Congress hasn't officially declared war with anyone since like 1942, though it has authorized the use of force in some cases. But there's nothing here from Congress. Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky, says this is unconstitutional. There's Democrats saying that this is unconstitutional, the bombing of Iran. What should Congress be doing now that this has already happened? And how should something like this have gone?
I think that especially even from let's say this from a Trump perspective or a John Bolton perspective, he's having a pretty good week.
He is right in that hoverboard.
That you
Just
think
dancing.
that America has the unipolar duty to disarm by military force if need be the nuclear ambitions of Iran, right? Donald Trump said, what did he say 3-4 days ago? Like, I'm thinking about it. I'm giving him 2 weeks. Like, first, he gave him 60 days, and then Israel's bombs happened on the 61st day. And then second, he's like, I'm mulling this over for 2 weeks. 2 weeks is enough time to have a congressional discussion, and arguably, if you're doing the thing of saying, like, could happen, I don't know, we know where Khamenei is, we could do something about that, but we're not right now, but maybe we will, maybe regime change, maybe 2 weeks. I don't see what is at all limiting your power by saying, okay, let's open it up for debate in Congress. Because first of all, most people not named Thomas Massie and Rand Paul on the Republican side are just going to do whatever Trump says because they're cowards. But still, it is important from a sense of constitutional legitimacy and the habits of a republic that has different branches of power. And theoretically, again, from the Trump Bolton point of view, you might have something that's a little bit more substantial. I mean, it matters that George W. Bush did go to Congress. There was a debate in Congress, both after 9/11, talking about Afghanistan and leading to the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, and also the 2002 one that points to Iraq. You go to Congress in these cases. Barack Obama didn't come close to doing that in Libya. 2013 is a little bit different in Syria, and that is interesting, but it's important from the point of view of, do you think that we should have a monarchical military unitary executive or not to do this? And sometimes that actually expresses more of a united front against whatever foreign baddie that you're going after. So that's what I think that Congress and the president should do, just as basic civic responsibility. And now I think Congress should demand a vote and see what's going on, and talk about it and debate it on the floor. They probably won't. There will be some Thomas Massey Rowe kind of action on that, I'm sure, and it won't go very far, but it's better than not to try. So that's what I think Congress should do right now.
Quick follow-up. The argument I have heard against your theory of, well, they had 2 weeks to debate and they should have done that, is that would have removed the element of surprise, and that, in fact, that I'm going to think about this for 2 weeks was intentionally designed as a feint, right? Yeah. Basically, to give Trump the ability to attack in a way that Iran would not be expecting. And so
No doubt, investing maximum power of the strongest military in the world to the whims of one person allows for all kinds of surprise attacks. So yes, that definitely, if your dreams are to maximize the use of that power, those are not my dreams. I think my dreams are more, we live in a constitutional republic, and we understood earlier on in that republic that power corrupts. And part of that corruption is just the corruption of wanting to hit the do something button. And so we shouldn't be so quick to do that. Most Americans in Congress have forgotten that, at least in a tangible way.
I think also, if I may, just to follow up on that, the fact that Trump at least twice in the past couple of weeks has publicly said, oh yeah, we're doing treaty talks, or we're doing negotiations. We're going to meet on Sunday, and then the bombs start falling on Friday. You've got 2 weeks, I'm going to think about it for 2 weeks, and then, something happens immediately. The U.S. has proven itself certainly over the course of the 21st century as the worst ally possible. We don't do what we say we're going to do. We don't leave when we say we're going to leave. We go in when we don't say what we're going to, when we're not going to go in, and things like that. This just furthers the idea that if you are a country that is an ally of the U.S., forget about the enemies. Like, if you're an ally, why would you ever fucking trust anything coming out of an American spokesman, particularly from the executive branch? Because they are just not fair, clean, honest actors. In the first big tranche of WikiLeaks exposures that had to do with a lot of diplomatic cables about things like, and they showed that, the French government and other European governments were saying one thing internally and another thing externally. And in a weird way, even though this is the reason why Hillary Clinton hated Julian Assange the way she did, what came out from the American cables was that people in the American State Department were saying the same thing in private as they were publicly. And we should have been proud of that as a country. That is all out the window. And it's just from the point of view of being an ally. Like, who would ever trust America to keep its word? It's disastrous. Of course, from a constitutional perspective and from, a true Republican, small R Republican thing, but also just from geostrategy. This is like, it's just like a gigantic nightmare.
All right, Katherine, I want you to close out this discussion here. You worked at the Weekly Standard, and when Trump was campaigning, a lot of his supporters said, "Look, a vote for Trump is a vote against the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party, against exactly what the Weekly Standard represented." Right? Like, if you dislike John McCain and bomb Iran, vote for Trump because he is the antithesis of that. And in fact, the hawks, the neoconservatives, were amongst the staunchest never Trumpers, right? Liz Cheney in particular was someone who was just out there campaigning against Donald Trump. And yet with this attack, they have finally gotten, in some ways, the thing that they have wanted most for the last, 20 years or so. What should we make of that? What should that tell us about, neoconservative power and the persistence of those ideas in America?
The place that I go here actually is just like the Jesse Walker place, which is a reminder that the spectrum of American politics is a slippery chutes and ladders game, and that at any time everybody can be in a different spot. And I know I sound like Matt Welch here, but the
Please
idea.
work in gloopy and Lord Licorice, if you're going with the shapes
Okay,
of
I'm also going to
ladders.
use the word Fantasia just for fun. Right. But like this is exactly the sort of thing, right? Like you have some extremely, extremely deeply committed Never Trumpers who were, tweeting strange new respect this weekend. And I expect to see more of that because people do have hierarchies of priority. And the people who at the very, very top of their hierarchy of political priority was not do any more forever wars and voted for Trump. Sorry, you guessed wrong. And I do give credit to some folks like Dave Smith who have said, yes, I was wrong. I was wrong about that. I guessed wrong. I would like to see that happen more often. But our political coalitions are not stable. Our clusters of policy around left and right are not stable. And pretending that they are gets you tied up in J.D. Vance style knots.
All right. We'll have more from Candyland right after this. We'll try to get that ladder up to the, so you skip the gloopy part, right? Because he's the worst. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Men today face so much pressure to perform, to provide, to keep everything together. So it's no wonder that 6 million men in the United States suffer from depression every year, and it's not always diagnosed. But folks, it's okay to struggle. Real strength comes from opening up about what you're carrying and doing something about it so you can be your best self for yourself, but also for the others in your life. If you're a man and you're feeling the weight of the world, talk to someone, a loved one, a friend, or a therapist. Therapy can help you learn positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. With over 35,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform. It serves over 5 million people globally. It's convenient, too. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/roundtable. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/roundtable. All right, our listener question comes from Andrew in Idaho, which is relevant to his question. Hi, Reason Roundtable, he writes. I grew up in a sparsely populated northern Idaho county that is 75% public land with more than 1,200 square miles of jagged mountains, forests, and rivers. Nearly every weekend of my childhood was spent camping, fishing, and recreating in these spaces. Libertarians should be for the privatization of public lands, correct? But for me, this is a very upsetting piece of proposed legislation. As my gun-loving, backwoods hunting, wildland firefighting friend put it, get ready for the Selkirk Ranch, owned by Rupert Murdoch. The left and the right in my neck of the woods seem to be against this, and this, I assume, is Mike Lee's bill to sell off a small portion of federal lands. So he wonders, am I going to lose my libertarian card over this? Talk me over the ledge, or I guess the private equity-owned cliff. Love the show, he writes. Katherine, what do you think?
Yeah, I do think that this is something where we should be keeping a lot of perspective. So again, the feds own so much of this country. There is nothing in this bill that touches national parks. There's nothing that touches national monuments. There's nothing that even touches wilderness areas, as far as I can tell. We're talking about little isolated parcels of land that are difficult to manage, according to Mike Lee and others. That could be used for infrastructure or housing development. So I think that it's just, this is sort of the same as when you hear if we cut the budget, we're going to have to lay off all the teachers and firefighters. Like if we sell some federal land, we're going to have to auction off Yellowstone to Rupert Murdoch. Like there's a huge logical leap in there that is not, in fact, the reality. And I think it's something like 2 million acres. It's not a lot. And handing it off to some private developers or for private uses does not strike me as bad. Now, of course, I would love to see that process done in like a rational way that might make it possible for preservationists to acquire that land. If that really is the best, highest use, then maybe like some kind of market mechanism could be used to discover that. I assume, just based on past experience, that that's not how this is going to go. Prove me wrong.
Nick, what do you think? Federal lands, should we sell them?
Sure. I'm just happy to see Mike Lee no longer making jokes about politicians who were assassinated by crazy people. So, it's a good week for Mike Lee. Yeah, based Mike Lee. I grew up in New Jersey, where many of the beaches are privatized. They're owned and operated by private entities. There is a lot of value to doing that. And I also worked at a municipally owned beach that was sandwiched between a sewage processing plant and an old ammo dump from World War II.
A lot of stuff is making sense right now.
Yeah, I'm betting that if Ideal Beach in what used to be called East Kingsburg, New Jersey, is now called North Middletown, if that had been privately owned and operated, it would have been at least marginally less scummy, and it also would not have cost taxpayers any money, including for lifeguards like me, who were, incredibly attentive, and nobody ever died in the water while I was there, partly because nobody ever went in the water because of the sewage and the ammo.
Matt, what do you think?
I shout out to Idaho, love it. Scattered my grandpa's ashes in the Snake River. Shout out to Evel Knievel as well.
Did you do it in an Evel Knievel style?
I just tried to preempt the Nick Gillespie reference, and it didn't work. I'm of two minds of this bill. Ultimately, I do not like it or love it, I should say, because part of it is mandating of what we should do with the land. So we're going from federal government mandating what we should do with the land to the federal government mandating how the land might be used, which is to say to build housing or do infrastructure. There are many different things you can do with that land. This month, there was the largest, I think, what they call a land back purchase. The Western Rivers Conservancy bought 47,000 acres in the kind of Klamath Basin in California, gave it back to under the management of a native tribe to manage the river and the wildlife. That sounds cool to me. I think that, yes, a ton of the West, the Mountain West and the West is owned by the federal government. I would like to see less of that owned by the federal government, including in an area that this bill doesn't touch, which is the military. The military owns 5% of New Mexico, of Nevada, 4% of California, Arizona, and Utah. And Utah in particular has a long-standing, we've written about it Reason for the decades, long-standing beef with the federal government of like, hey, we would like to manage this land, including managing it for conservation purposes and wildlife and national park purposes or type of purposes, because we love it too, but we don't like your management of it. I think probably the best way to do a bill like this is to make it state-by-state centric. For instance, Montana doesn't like this bill at all. The Republicans in Montana are like, screw this, we don't want it. We have a different view of it. Utah has, again, a long-standing view in a different direction. So putting this in the little energy component of a big, beautiful bill means that this is going to be debated probably not in Congress, but in panicked fundraising emails over the next, over the last 2 weeks and over the next week and a half. That's not great. We should have rational discussions about how to deleverage the federal government from the West, even knowing that there's kind of a status quo bias, since this is the way it's been for a long time. People panic when you change any part of it. I think less of the West should be governed or owned by the federal government, but do this in a rational way, and don't do it in a way that tells you, well, you must build housing or you must build infrastructure. Actually open it up for different private uses.
So that just reminds me that I grew up in North Florida with some hippie peacenik parents, and they had this conflicted feeling, because this was, of course, near Eglin Air Force Base, which at least at the time was billed as the largest by landmass military installation in the Western world. So not by population, but just sort of controlled more acreage than any other Western military installation. And a lot of it they didn't build stuff on, in part because they were using it for Ranger training, which meant there were signs posted everywhere like, please don't go here because maybe there's bombs in the road. Like, you don't drive down this dirt road, right? But my parents, hippie peaceniks, like I said, would drive by all of these acres of undeveloped land and be like, it's sort of weird that we like that the military has stopped anyone from developing things here. And this is what I grew up with, was like this influence of like, actually the military is bad, but what if the military also stopped developers from building hotels? Anyway, it's an odd upbringing. All right. Reminder, we love to answer your short, pithy, succinct, and otherwise not very long questions. Email your questions to podcast@reason.com. That's podcasts@reason.com. All right. Let's move on to our final topic, the New York City mayoral race, in particular the Democratic Party primary, which pits former Governor Andrew Cuomo against Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani. Andrew Cuomo is, Andrew Cuomo, of the beloved COVID updates and the book on leadership that came out before they found out that he faked the data on nursing home deaths during the pandemic. And Mamdani is a socialist, a young, charming, YouTube-friendly socialist, but a socialist with a rap career past. So there are some other folks running. And we are still in primary season. But it seems like the choice here for New Yorkers is between an avatar of the failed Democratic establishment and a youthful rabble-rouser who has truly terrible policy ideas, even in addition to the rapping. I thought about calling this segment Wham Bam Thank You Ma'am Donnie. No, we're going to call it Oh No.
No backing into segment titles. Peter.
We're going to call it Oh No Cuomo. And Nick, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, boy.
Why do we keep getting stuck with two awful, awful choices in politics, and how do we break out of that?
Because that's what we deserve. We're fallen beings, and to be alive is to have committed original sin. So we get exactly what we deserve.
I did not ask ChatGPT to play philosopher when it answered my question.
Okay, but it is partly because New York City is a democratically controlled city. With the exception of occasional, black swan types of Republicans who often end up becoming independents anyway, dropping in and changing things, somebody like Mike Bloomberg. It is democratically controlled. And when you have major, single party control, over time, you become terrible at producing good candidates because everything is about special interests and back scratching and time serving and things like that. And in a profound way, we seem to be going back to the nadir of New York in the early 70s, at least politically, where somebody like an Abe Beam type could get elected. I think that structurally is what's going on, is that and in that sense, Mamdani, who would be truly awful on every level, other than, since people don't care about Cuba or Venezuela anymore, what would be great about a Mamdani administration is that he would bring home to America the tragedy of communism in the country's greatest city, biggest city at very least. But that's why we have bad candidates, and it's not going to change until politics becomes more competitive, or common sense Democrats come up with somebody who's more like an Ed Koch and not a retread like Andrew Cuomo or a Democratic socialist like Mamdani.
Matt, I want to pull back a little bit and ask you just why big city governance in America seems to suck so bad. Right? You have New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles. You just have this kind of increasingly prevalent species of incompetent politician who somehow or another keeps rising up, especially in democratically controlled urban areas, right? And we hear all the time that Republicans aren't interested in the details of governance. In some cases, that is fair. But it also, in all of these cities, it also seems like Democrats aren't interested in the details of governance, or at least in doing it well. So what gives?
I mean, I think that Republicans are very interested in details of government to the extent that they're in municipal governments and especially state governments. I mean, Ron DeSantis, love him or hate him, he cares about the details of government. And Republicans on the state and local level produce vastly different results than Democrats do. And we forget this because we spend so much time thinking about national and especially presidential politics that we lose sight of these differences. So part of it is that the ideological sorting of the two parties is such that Democrats' theory of governance and politics and economics has marched leftwards in the Bernie Sanders kind of long decade. And so when played out on the local level, it's just awful. But also, when you're not just when you're a uniparty, but when you are in a moderately successful city, New York is still very successful, Chicago much less so, Los Angeles just as a city, not as a government entity, you've got guaranteed revenue streams. And so these structures will attach to them like suckerfish and just suck the life out of it. And you've I can make this much money by promising these jobs to this union and the public sector unions that have captured so many of these places. So they use kind of these airy-fairy theories, but then there's also this practical predation That's part of it. I do want to say one thing about why are we stuck with these two candidates? We are not. There's going to be at least 5 names on the ballot in November in the New York mayoral race. 2 of them will be, regardless of what happens on Tuesday, will be Andrew Cuomo and Zohran Mamdani, because we have in New York all these crazy other little parties. So if Mamdani loses, he'll be on the Working Families ticket almost certainly. If and when Cuomo loses, he'll be on the Fight and Deliver party ticket. Eric Adams is going to be running as an independent.
What's that party about? It was like, that party was literally invented to be Cuomo's vehicle in this case, right?
They just play Jaime Escalante fanfic all day long. There's a guy named Jim Walden.
I don't know what that means.
A former U.S. Look up your recent archives, sir. Jim Walden, former U.S. attorney who, but also represented Molly Bloom as an attorney. So points for that, I guess. And the Republican Party has a nominee, Curtis Sliwa. Nick Gillespie, the guardian angel, is going to be on the Republican ticket. So we're going to have 5 names.
He's been keeping New York streets safe and lying about being kidnapped for going on 40 years now.
So yeah, there will be more of a choice, but it's all crappy every direction you look, and almost every one of those directions is someone who has already misgoverned me. So I look forward to not voting for any of the bastards.
So you should also run. You should put yourself on the ticket as a person who has prominently misgoverned you.
Canada, Matt Welch. Canada. Maybe Toronto under the late lamented Rob Ford or something like that would be a better run city.
Speaking of people who have misgoverned Matt Welch, Katherine, one of the narratives in this race, at least between Cuomo and Mamdani, is that there is a big divide between older voters and younger voters, with Mamdani really doing very well with people under 45. You and I are still under 45. Cuomo just does much better with not just older voters, but also with people who are like homeowners, sort of people who want something a little more stable, people who are maybe don't love him, but are just much more comfortable with a conventional Democratic candidate. How do you see that shaping, the future of New York politics here? Like, what does that tell you about sort of the youth and where all of this is going?
I'm mostly trying not to know a ton of detail about this race, but it does actually sort of seem to me that the Cuomo-Mamdani matchup is what New York is like on some sort of fundamental level. Like, all the New Yorkers that I know are either kind of like gross, sclerotic, like old school, pragmatic Democrats, or like semi-bunkaroo young socialists. And so I sort of think it takes us back to the place we started this segment. Like, these are the candidates New York deserves. At least the New Yorkers I know are one of those two people, or would affiliate with one of those two people. And whether it's old or young, or homeowner or not homeowner, or whatever it is, I don't think it matters. Those people don't seem to me to be that far off of a reflection of what the population of New York is like. Arguably there's a better world where that's not the case, but that's not the world we live in.
Draw this out just a little bit more for me, just in terms of their campaign styles, because Mamdani has succeeded in part by doing really well online. Like I said, he's a social media socialist, and he's actually kind of charming, but he's done things like going on the Throwing Fits podcast, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a men's fashion podcast that is sort of interminably sort of insidery, right? Like, just all these inside jokes, and it's kind of interesting. But like, he's there to sort of talk about clothing and like the reality TV that he watches, and he has done this kind of charm offensive. And do you versus Cuomo, who's, like I said, the establishment candidate, like the unions and sort of just the power structures and power centers, does that suggest to you that the next set of power structures in New York are going to be weird social media things? I mean, are we going to end up in a world where it's odd podcasts who are determining who is the mayor of New York and maybe eventually the president?
I'm going to kind of sound like I'm being a bitch here, but I honestly look forward to when we get to the next cycle electorally, and we no longer have to talk about, was this politician going on some weird podcast the reason he won? Because it's not. It never is. Like, there's a bunch of platforms where they talk to people, and at the moment, weird podcasts are one of them. But the weird podcast will become mainstream, or we'll move on to the next thing. And I just don't. I say that hopefully for this weird podcast to become mainstream. But I just feel like that question of like, did Trump go on the right combination of podcasts and that's why he won the election? No. If this dude wins,
it was the Nelk Boys.
Was it
obviously.
The Throwing Fits podcast? No, it wasn't.
All right. It wasn't
if
enough,
he'd done
boys.
the
It
Hot
wasn't throwing
Wings
fists.
challenge, I think he would have gotten 55% of the popular vote.
I love that show. I must confess.
If I may, to go back to
You
the
may.
broader question of how do you get good governance in big cities? And one possible answer is that you have democratic cities you have blue cities in red states. So a place like Austin, a place like Salt Lake City, Raleigh, North Carolina, where some of these states are more purple than dark
How
red
did you
or
just
dark blue.
pronounce the name of that place?
Raleigh.
Raleigh?
That's where they have Target.
Raleigh.
Raleigh.
Okay. Raleigh?
No,
Raleigh,
Raleigh.
North Carolina? Raleigh. Yeah, like Sir
No,
Walter
still
Raleigh.
wrong.
I know, okay.
Where are you
Who
from?
cares? A city that I'm quickly becoming, hate-filled towards in North Carolina, but they're democratic cities with democratic councils in red states, and they tend to do pretty well. And that seems to be one of the ways that you get better governance in places. And that might also point to one of the problems with places like New York, California, and Illinois, and their major cities. These used to be states that were much more mixed. They've all become kind of political monocultures over time. And that's the worst of all possible worlds, because then you just, everything becomes, just kind of institutionalized for mediocrity, and people who are not really fighting for new votes or expanding anything. They are just kind of trying to figure out how do they climb to the top of the pole within their own separate crab bucket. And I apologize for that metaphor.
Fun fact that's not a metaphor. Before I lived in Florida, I briefly lived in Hickory, North Carolina. Yeah. So let's move on to our final segment here. What you've been watching and consuming: books, movies, television shows, games, other forms of media that we have engaged with over the past week or so. Matt Welch, let's start with you.
So part of my month-long mourning of Brian Wilson of Beach Boys fame, I've been watching or consuming bits that I hadn't previously looked at, including the 1995 documentary directed by Don Was of Was Not Was fame, called I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, which is also the name of a famous Brian Wilson Beach Boys tune. Pretty interesting artifact. I don't recommend it to the broader world unless you have a pre-existing interest in Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. It's an artifact of the 90s as much as anything else, because it's black and white. Imagine doing a Beach Boys or Brian Wilson documentary. Let's do it in black and white with like typewriter font. Let's get Courier font all over this. It has interviews in cooperation with Brian Wilson. He does performances that are actually pretty decent of old classic tunes and weirdo newer ones. You see his mom, his weird mom. At some point, he and his weird mom and his brother Carl, who wasn't long for the world at the time, sit around a piano and play God Only Knows. And it's kind of nice and moving. My favorite parts of it were watching Tom Petty and David Crosby, of all people, try to explain and kind of do a pretty good job of like what made Brian Wilson, both from a songwriting, compositional, and production standpoint, so just far ahead of everyone, and how they were just like hopelessly playing catch up and realizing that they couldn't. Pretty interesting. It had, I think, a box office of $50,000. So no one has watched this. I've had the soundtrack on cassette for a long time, which is pretty good. But check it out if you have interest. It's enjoyable
cassette?
and it's super 90s on cassette. Yeah, I still have several cassette players, Catherine.
Okay. Nick, what vintage technology have you been watching and listening to things on?
Oh, an ancient technology, the novel, which is, at least a couple hundred years old in its recognizable form. But I've most recently read the novel James by Percival Everett, who's the writer whose novel Erasure formed the basis for the recent movie American Fiction. James is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective. It is absolutely one of the best novels I think I have ever read, certainly in the past 25 years, because it is both in conversation with American history, with the particular book, Huck Finn, and then also the kind of historiography and the literature about Huck Finn, about the Enlightenment, about the weird duality in America, that it's a country founded upon expressly talking about all men being created equal and having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but being built on slavery. And in that sense, it actually is, it's not an answer or a rebuke to the 1619 project, but it's trotting that kind of ground, as well as doing the same for the 1776 project and whatnot. It is just a stunning book. And the more you know about the literature about Huck Finn and about Mark Twain and about kind of Enlightenment discourse, the better it gets. I can't recommend it highly enough. And the other thing that I love about it is that when I was in grad school, particularly at Temple University, there was, a belief that American literature was moving towards its ultimate expression in a particular form of metafictional postmodern writing that was writing about writing, essentially. So, and in a way, somebody like Quentin Tarantino does this with movies. His movies are never about history. They're always about other movies, and does it quite well. In an analogous way,
it's like Grant Morrison's Animal Man.
Yeah, well, Percival Everett in James has perfected this version of postmodernism, which is so alive and vibrant and meaningful. And what I love best about it, because there is currently a best-selling biography of Mark Twain by Ron Chernow, that has been atop the New York Times bestseller list for about 5 weeks, even though it's gotten mediocre reviews. Twain is one of the most compelling characters, very weird. I worked with Leslie Fiedler at SUNY Buffalo, who is a major scholar of him, and it talked about all of the contradictions and ambivalences that Twain had towards modernity and towards blacks and towards freedom, etc. And it just kills me at the end that Percival Everett, in his acknowledgments at the end of the book, says, that he says, finally, a nod to Mark Twain. His humor and humanity affected me long before I became a writer. Heaven for the climate, hell for my long-awaited lunch with Mark Twain. It's just, James is a phenomenal book, and it would be an incredible beach read as well.
Speaking of Huck Finn, I watched a movie about zombies 28 years later, and like Huck Finn, it is kind of a travelogue, episodic, a story about a person going through a weird, strange land and discovering their country. So this takes place 28 years later after a zombie apocalypse in the UK, and the UK has been quarantined, so there's a sort of a Brexit aspect to this, right? It's surrounded by warships. Life has gone on in the Europe and in America. We see sort of signs that there's like technology, the internet, that sort of thing. But in the UK, they've just been left to their own devices. And so you have the story starts with a little city on an island that is protected by this land bridge that is mostly underwater, except on very rare occasions. And a father and his son venture off to the mainland to discover what is out there. And I won't tell you what happens from there, but if you remember the original 28 Days Later, this was a sort of revolution in zombie movie theory, right? Like, it wasn't just that the zombies were fast, it was also that even more than, or in a different way than the George Romero films, the zombies were this quite potent political metaphor. The movie came out right after 9/11, and it was all about sort of how man is the real monster, right? And it was so dark and so grim and so cynical. And it was great. It's just an absolute kind of mini genre masterpiece. And what's fascinating about this movie, because this is by the same writer and same director who did 28 Days Later, what's fascinating about it is that they've come back to this idea, and it's not bleak. And it's not cynical anymore. Yeah, there's a bunch of gory stuff and, sort of big zombie set pieces. But ultimately, this movie resolves on the idea that maybe the monsters are the real men. And maybe in the aftermath of an apocalypse, of society just melting down, green shoots sort of start popping back up again, and humans figure out how to live and build a society, and maybe the zombies will too, even. And so it's just this sort of fascinating and strangely hopeful movie. It ends with an absolutely incredible Ralph Fiennes performance. In the trailers, you think he's going to be some sort of like murderous, incredible zombie hunter guy. And it turns out he's just like a doctor who's decided to become an artist of death, like to commemorate and memorialize all the people who have died from the zombie attacks, and like find something beautiful in all of the death and something to celebrate. And so it is It's just a really odd movie in many ways, is not exactly what you expect, but a beautiful film and a kind of strange and surprisingly moving movie that I just wasn't expecting at all. Katherine, what do you have for us for your watcha?
I had a very long drive to West Virginia to drop my daughter off at camp, and I put an ask out to the Reason staff, what are 4 hours of podcasts that I could listen to? And Meredith Bragg of the Bragg Brothers comedy team came through for me with The World's Greatest Con, Project Alpha. This is a podcast that's a couple years old. It's Brian Brushwood, who Nick recently interviewed, as well as Justin Robert Young, who's a friend of Reason as well. And it is great, you guys. So it's 4 hours of, do you remember or are you aware of, like in the late 70s, early 80s, Uri Geller just out here bending spoons like for years, and just all of America being like, oh my God, psychic powers are real. It was like a very weird moment, which I like sort of even dimly remember the end of. And James, the Amazing Randy, who is a magician and kind of debunker, skeptic, hero to many of us, was sort of Uri Geller's primary antagonist. But this is about a kind of subplot within that whole conflict in which two teenagers just get themselves signed up as the test subjects at a psychic laboratory. So it's a laboratory that's like funded by the McDonnell Douglas folks, or I guess the McDonald side of that. A fair amount of funding, I think something couple $2 million in current dollars, and they end up inside this lab pretending to be able to, read notes that are inside boxes and bend metal, and at one point they claim to have produced a psychic storm in which they like bend every piece of metal in the whole lab in the night by having a dream. It goes on for years, and then in the end, they reveal that it was all a hoax. And the thing that is good about this podcast, it is not just like a great kind of tale of this con, but it's also like very psychologically interesting. So there's a bunch of stuff in here about like the role of the Amazing Randy, who's sort of an impresario, but like he maybe takes a little more credit than he should have taken for the work that the boys did. And then also the relationship that they have with the people at this lab, right? The people at this lab are true believers, and they spend years, many, many weekends working together, and they kind of become friends. And it's this horrible situation where they have to be like, so our rule for ourselves was if you asked us directly, were we hoaxing you? We wouldn't lie, but you never asked. And so it's just this like very wonderful kind of layered treatment of a very, very good story. And it was exactly the thing to keep me awake for 4 hours of driving if you have some summer vacation driving ahead of you. World's Greatest Con. It is also kid-friendly if you want to listen in the car with your family.
The Amazing Randy was great in so many ways. In particular, he was an audiophile skeptic and famously offered $1 million to audiophiles who could prove that something like some $7,000 set of cables, like audio cables, were much better. And of course, no one ever won the prize. And so it wasn't just that he debunked spiritualism, it's also that he debunked high-priced audio gear.
Truly a hero for the Suderman.
I love part of the context of that, and the lab was at Washington University in St. Louis. So anybody who paid to go to that school should be ashamed of themselves for housing that.
Yeah,
place.
the primary researcher was a professor who I think did not lose his position.
Yeah,
as well as graduate students who I think did not lose their position.
Although
remember.
The guy was broken by the experience, and it's incredible in the human drama of all of that. But I always loved the idea that, the Soviets were coming up with psychic soldiers who could do all these kinds of things. So we're going to combat them by being able to slightly bend keys with our mind. And it's like, take that, commies. Like, try to start your MiGs now when the key doesn't
weird,
quite
right?
fit
like,
in.
It was
if you could do this, why would you spend time barely perceptibly bending a spoon or a key? It's like, I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, this was also...
Well, because maybe eventually you find the super psychic who can do a whole lot more. There's a whole movie about this.
Yeah, so this was the framework of the podcast, is that it's sort of a social contagion, right? That just people wanted to believe, and for whatever reason, this was the thing that belief settled on. and that the conditions already have to have kind of been right socially to even have the door be open to this. Another little tidbit is that this lab was looking for children on the theory that the children wouldn't lie about being psychic, which is the funniest thing I've ever heard if you've ever met a child.
All right, that's our show, folks. Before we go, remember we do have a reason versus debate on drug legalization tomorrow, June 24th in Washington, D.C. You can still buy tickets at reason.com/events. And that is not all. The Reason Roundtable will be coming at you live in New York City, the Village Underground on July 15th. That's Tuesday, July 15th. Join us as we talk about the news and answer your questions. It's going to be a hot one and a fun one. Nick, is there anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Yeah, this Wednesday, June 25th, we will be doing a live taping of the Reason Interview podcast. I'll be talking to Elizabeth Nolan Brown about her excellent July cover story about the weird, strange politics of Maha, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and kind of food more broadly in this topsy-turvy world. And you can go to reason.com/events to buy tickets for that.
It's a great story, and Liz is always a lot of fun. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That's reason.com/donate. Thanks so much for listening. The Reason Roundtable will return.